Okay.
and I would like to do something about that.
Okay. Yeah. So when you get email back, send me a note, and we can plan something.
Okay, that would be wonderful.
Great.
It may have to be done by phone, but we'll
Well,
see.
phone is fine too. Phone is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
All right. So I have one more administrative thing to take care of, and then we will um, then we will do then we will start it. Let me just do this, and then the next thing is to introduce Mallory and Bob. Try to get this here. Try to figure this out. All right. So let's see how this goes here. All right. I apologize, everybody. So this is on the screen with us. And so Ellen and Fred, I just want to tell you who's on the call with us. So Kent is here from Winthrop, right? Is that right, Kent from Winthrop? Yep. And Ellen Kahn is here in Brookline, as is Ann Whitaker is here in Brookline.
Hello.
Lori is in Cambridge.
No, she's
Ellen.
not. She's in Newton.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at Helen, saying I have to remember where Helen is, and
Right.
My brain just kind of did a little
All right.
but yes, Lori is in Newton. I apologize. Helen, are you in Cambridge or
Yes, Cambridge.
Oh, great. It's fake. So Helen's in Cambridge.
Yes.
Ellen
two of us.
Thoreau is also in Cambridge, and Mayim is in Brookline at 112 Center Street, and Fred is down in Randolph at the Fireman Community.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and so and with us from Brookline, I think, right, is Mallory and Romney, who are two volunteers who are going to join us today, and wanted to see what we were up to. And trying to figure out a good place for them to participate in the life of our community. So we'll figure out what that might look like. And Heva just came on. Hello, Heva. Heva is.
I'm sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. Heva is also in Brookline, but on Beacon Street at 1550 Beacon Street. So we have this is like the miracle of Zoom, is that we have quite the scattered, the Jews have been scattered across the Boston area, but we're all able to come together on Zoom, which is great.
Instead of the Red Sea, the Charles River.
Exactly. The Charles River and get from one place, yeah. Yeah, it is very funny how it's how the river really is this odd barrier despite all the bridges. All right, so today what we're going to talk about is we're going to go back to talking about Shabbat. I hope everyone has had so far a wonderful Pesach and just as kosher as you want it to be. This has been the year of weird Pesach based on my conversations with Jews in general, but also with rabbinic colleagues. Just to know that if you're having a weird Pesach, don't think that it's only you having a weird Pesach. There's a lot of people having weird Pesachs. I have one colleague who decided that he wasn't going to do any Seders. He moved from one part of the country to another part of the country, and his plan was to go back to that other part of the country for family seders, and since that couldn't happen, he spent so much of his time on Zoom that he decided that he was going to liberate himself from the obligation of doing seders, and I don't know if I've actually ever seen him look happier, so I think it was a good decision.
I had a nice one with Sherry and Jim Leffert on Saturday.
That was great. That
Sunday
was
night,
really
yeah.
wonderful. That was
Saturday night. Yeah.
It was.
Now, isn't it a mitzvah to do a seder? I mean, isn't it like you're supposed to do a seder? I was always taught that you're supposed to.
Absolutely, right? It is, and it is a really interesting. That's why it's such an interesting year, right? Because, right, there are a lot of mitzvahs, right? There are a lot of mitzvahs that the tradition sets up, and of course, each person sort of decides, which mitzvahs are they going to incorporate into their practice, and which mitzvahs are they not going to incorporate into their practice, right? And one of the wonderful things about our tradition is that there is no one person who is obligated by all mitzvot. Right? There's everyone, even according to, even if you're the most machmir, the most strict, right? There are going to be mitzvahs that don't apply to you. And most people, right, are not as strict as they could potentially be. And I'm not actually in any way sort of suggesting that a person should be stricter than she is. But just that I think that this is one of those years, right, where things that really had significant meaning in the past somehow might not have quite the same level of meaning, and it's a very complicated topic, right? Because each person has their own experience of that. Just as an example, I actually had decided that I was going to liberate myself from a Sunday seder, from a second night seder. But Jim and Sherry invited us, and Moses, much to my shock, Moses, by the way, is my younger son. Much to my shock and awe, agreed to go to the seder with me.
It was nice seeing him there too.
Well, he attended the one you did with Rachel.
Yes, right. He was in and out of that.
Right.
He was there, but he let's just say he was not nearly as engaged.
Right, but I think it was the first step.
Right. He was much more engaged in Jim's seder. And so that this also made it sort of an unusual thing, which was that I was able to I actually had this bonus gift of being able to go to another seder, and it was really beautiful. And I do think, and Shabbat, I think is, we'll get to the Heschel in a minute, but I do think that Shabbat is like this, right? And I think that it's helpful sometimes when we're thinking about, if becoming a bar bat mitzvah, right, is about becoming, traditionally, right, it marks the moment, not of adulthood, right, which is why I don't think it's that big of a deal to have a bar bat mitzvah at another time in your life. Really what it is an affirmation of sort of religious independence, right? Of you being responsible for your own spiritual life, right? Which is different than being an adult, right? People at 13 years old are in some parts of our tradition at 12 years old if you're a girl.
A girl.
Yeah.
That at that point, right, sort of early adolescence. Although these days, of course, some kids have already been in adolescence, for a couple of years. My kids were a little slower than that. But that early adolescence, right, is the time when a kid should really begin taking responsibility for their own spiritual journey, right? And some kids are ready for that, and other kids maybe not, right? But there's never, I don't think, a time after that when it's not also sort of appropriate to think about, okay, well, I am going to take more responsibility, right, for my own spiritual path. And so that's kind of, one of the ways to think about this process, right, is that everyone in this, on this call, right, has committed to figuring out, okay, well, what is the spiritual path that I'm really going to be pursuing? And for many people, it is sort of intellectual learning, right? It's about Torah, it's about learning Hebrew, right? But that doesn't have to be the only way, right? And one of the things I'd like you to think about, and this is relevant to the whole conversation about Shabbat, right, is what are the spiritual practices, right, beyond showing up at shul, beyond becoming more conversant with the prayer book, actual, what are some of the traditional practices you're going to take on? And it doesn't mean that you have to take them on and never take them off, right? I put my kippah in the morning and I take it off when I get home at night, or when I go to bed, so it's not like you need to wear a kippah all the time. But that is one practice that for me, at a certain point, became very important. And so I do think, right, that what Heva said is very important, right? All of these things are mitzvahs, right? And so some of them, of course, are mitzvahs in the sense that, in the Hebrew sense of it, right? What does mitzvah mean in the Hebrew?
It's wonderful.
Commandment.
It means a commandment, right?
And a blessing.
Right. So a blessing or a good deed, right? People
Yep.
will come out and
Yep.
people will come out and oh, this person came and visited me when I was sick. It was such a mitzvah, right? Yes,
Yeah.
it's a mitzvah because he's commanded, right? We have an obligation.
Yes.
When they're ill, right? Jews have an obligation to go and visit them, right? But it was also a good deed, right? It was also an act of kindness, right? And a blessing to go and to take care of someone when they're ill, right? So,
Yes.
so it's really both things, right? And so, and right, that we can so for part of our life, right, do engage in certain spiritual practices, and then for whatever reason, right, maybe they begin to have less meaning and we need to renew them, right? It might mean that we need to imbue them with new meaning, right? Or we need to find variations on those practices that are more meaningful for us. And so one of the potentials, right? One of the things that we'll talk about today, we'll talk about Shabbat, right? We began talking about Shabbat in sort of the sort of cookbook kind of way. What do you do on a Friday night, right? But also to talk about Shabbat from a more experiential perspective, right? What makes Shabbat different than the rest of the week, right? And what are some of the practices on Shabbat, right, that make it distinct, that make it somehow special, right? And so the example of Passover is sort of a good one, right, in the sense that, for many years, probably many of us, probably not all of us, but many of us probably had certain practices that we just kind of did every year. That this is what we do for Pesach, right? And this was one of the years where, well, that maybe what we always do for Pesach needs to be different, right? And some of those things have been wonderful, right? Like having access to, for instance, I mentioned Jane Guberman before. She and her husband had seders with parts of the family. Never have had seders before, right? Because Seder was on Zoom rather than in person, right? But there's also not such nice things, like every year for Passover I make my salmon gefilte fish, and this year I didn't make it, and I really miss the gefilte fish. It was a mistake not to make it, but you know what? Things happen.
Rabbi, you should have come here. We made the salmon gefilte fish, and it was coming out of our ears.
Yes, well, I mean, it's funny. I used to make. It's this recipe from the New York Times.
Yes,
cookbook.
that's
Yes.
what I used. Yeah.
Oh, it's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I used to have to make 2 recipes worth, because we would eat a whole recipe worth at the Seder, right? And then we would need the other recipe for breakfast every morning for the for all of Pesach.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And and the kids liked it, and they and everyone loved it, which was so anyway, I didn't make it. I'm so happy that at least you made it, Mallory. That's great. All right. So one thing before we get to the Heschel, I just want to take a moment, and if people have a piece of paper, they can write this down, or if you don't want to, that's also fine. But I would like you to sort of think for just a moment about what is one thing that you do now, right, that makes Shabbat different than the rest of the week, right? And what's one thing that intrigues you as a possibility for something that might make Shabbat even more special of a day? And I'm gonna do this too, because I am in that situation where I feel like I need to do something, right, to further enhance my Shabbat observance. So I don't, and I'm also reminded, right, that this is also my bar mitzvah too. So.
As we're writing these down, can I digress for a moment into something you said about something that's a mitzvah that's also a good deed?
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes struggle with this dichotomy. Being a bit of a contrarian, I guess. I don't always like to do something just because I'm expected to.
Yeah.
But I get a lot of self-satisfaction in doing stuff for others, whether I'm expected to or not. And it became an issue with, I have, shall we say, an over-the-top frum cousin, who, when I was discussing the fact that I had made a half gallon of my New England style haroset and was distributing it to my friends, he says, well, that's not a mitzvah. The mitzvah is eating it at the Seder. And I said, no, the mitzvah is giving it to people who wouldn't have it otherwise.
Yes.
Well,
And yes, this, like your salmon gefilte fish,
right.
we eat it in yogurt every morning.
Yeah.
We eat it as a side dish every afternoon. It's our Pesach staple. Of course,
Yeah.
it would probably go well with salmon gefilte fish too.
This is the cashews and cranberries, right?
Granny Smith apples and cranberries. I did use traditional walnuts because I didn't have unsalted cashews.
Got it.
And I'll make it for anybody here next year.
That's great. That's great. So I have a response to Lori, but what is everyone done writing down what they're? And it can be it doesn't need to be a disposition on mine is all of 3 words. So all right. So I'm going to respond to Lori because I think this is a very important point that she's making, and then we can go to this exercise. So the reality, Lori, is that you're both correct, right? That from a halachic perspective, right, the mitzvah is to eat haroset at the table, right? And so people with a more sort of, shall we say, rigid understanding of what a mitzvah is, right, will focus on that as the mitzvah, right? It is also a mitzvah, right? Even in a halachic, in a sort of strict halachic framework. Does everyone know what I mean when I say halacha?
Oh, legal.
Right, sort of
Yeah.
Jewish legal. Although legal is not the it's not the greatest translation, right? Because halacha really has to do with, it comes from the verb lahalo, right, to walk. Le'echol, rather. No, that le'echol is to eat. But anyway, from halach, it's from walking, right? It's really
You
about
should walk and tell your children while you're walking.
Exactly. You should be this is the path you should walk, right?
Yeah.
The Jewish path, or the Jewish way, right? This is the way that we are. This is the way we do Jewish, right? So even within a strict understanding of that framework, what you are doing, Lori, by distributing haroset, right, is a mitzvah, right? It's a mitzvah at a slightly when I say higher level, I don't mean it's a better mitzvah. I just mean it's at one level above.
I hear you.
Right? Because, right, what are you doing? You're enabling other Jews to do the mitzvah. Right? And that itself is a mitzvah. Right? And you're also right? Because in addition to the halachic understanding of mitzvah, right, it's also a mitzvah because it's a good deed, and it gives you those warm fuzzies, and it gives the other people the warm fuzzies, right? Now,
I mean, I view the warm fuzzies part more. I would rather accumulate those for me or the other person than to think of mitzvahs like the life list for birders,
Right.
to check off the ones you've seen or done.
Right. And right. So there, I mean, and I was actually, I mean, I used to hear about mitzvah points, right? You get a certain number of points for all the mitzvahs you do. And then I encountered a traditional Jewish text, a Musar text it was, and the guy was actually talking about mitzvah points. And I was like, you must be kidding. You're like,
you just ruined mitzvah points for me.
I'm sorry?
You've just ruined mitzvah points for me.
Because it ruined it for me too, because I thought I was sort of saying something funny, but no, it's a real thing. Like, oh my God. So anyway, but the point is that
only for boys.
Yeah, I would argue and as well as encourage you, right, not to make too hard and fast of a distinction between the two types of mitzvahs.
No, of course not.
Right, and and to think about I think what is challenging for a lot of Jews, right, which I think would be challenging for everybody, but it's not always a part of people's traditions, right? There is the tradition in Judaism that doing something because you're commanded to do it, right, is actually more valuable and more more valuable and worth more mitzvah points than doing something that you're not obligated to do. Right? And I think that and I think that's the rabbis like to be provocative. I think it was on purpose provocative, right? So from your relative's perspective, Lori, right, eating the charoset at the table is more valuable because that's the actual thing that you're commanded to do, right, than this going out and making it possible for other people to do a mitzvah, because it's really on them, right, to get their own charoset if they don't have it. It's really not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to eat your own damn charoset, right? So, but just to remember, right, that that part of what's valuable, I think, right, is that most people, I think, maybe you, Lori, a little bit more than others, but I have the same reactions, right? I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to do something because someone tells me to do it, right? I want to do things, right, when they have meaning for me, right? The trouble, right, is that very often we don't know what the meaning of a certain behavior is going to be until we behave that way, if that makes sense, right? So we have to kind of allow ourselves a kind of level of flexibility to put ourselves sometimes into the uncomfortable position of doing something only because someone told me to do it, right? But when
Right, and I think it's also incumbent, if you're instructed to do something, I think it really helps to have the reason why. You're commanded to do this. Well, why are you commanded to do it?
Right. But I think very often, right, especially in Judaism, right, the reason for the mitzvot, right, first of all, we don't always have a reason for the mitzvot, right? And very often stop, doggy. And very often the reason we have, the reason that we're given, doggy, enough. There's no dog here. Stop.
That's what you think.
Somehow, I don't know what unmuted the dogs, but something is unmuted. And I've lost my train of thought here. Oh, doggy, stop. Please, come here, dog. Oh, come here. Oh, now you're stuck. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, everybody.
I will jump in from my phone. I too took people Harosis. I was invited to a Zoom Pesach with friends in New York because it's my friend from 4th grade, and this has been a tradition for us. But I couldn't because my internet isn't working at all. And what I think is that I like the person who was speaking. I don't know who you are, but I'm delighted to meet you this way. I'm not rebellious too much, but what I really love is doing something for somebody who needs it. And I did take food, Harosis, which was the only thing I could make, to people in my building who are Jewish. And one of them is on oxygen and couldn't get out to do anything about Passover. And the other one still has difficulties about the way she was brought up as a Jewish person. And it was just so neat that they both were very happy. We live in separate worlds because of the pandemic, and we don't see one another very often, but it's great when they were really happy. And it's just fun.
Yeah.
And I believe it's very important.
Right, and I think the thing to remember, right, and Ellen, that's a beautiful story, right, because it gets, I think, at what doing mitzvahs can bring, right? The harder level of mitzvahs, right, are the ones where, first of all, you don't necessarily see immediately, right, that kind of social benefit, right? And then also where you don't, what I was saying about the reason, right, that sometimes we don't even have a reason. Other times there is a reason given in the Torah or in the law codes, but the reason is just not something that makes sense to us, right? Or it's offensive, right? So then, right, you have a choice, right, between just not doing the mitzvah, right, because of what other people say that it means,
Oh, God.
right, or of doing the mitzvah, right, and finding a meaning in your performance of the mitzvah that is meaningful for you, right? So one of the, and so at another session we will discuss kashrut. So I won't go into it in too detailed of a fashion now, right? But one of the reasons for kashrut, right? Sometimes acknowledged, sometimes not acknowledged, right? Is to keep the Jews separate from other people, right? To keep the Jews together, right? If you don't eat with other Jews, if you don't eat with people who aren't Jewish, you're less likely to dance with people who are not Jewish, and then you're less likely to marry them, and so on and so forth, right? So
I think that there's also a practicality that Judaism brings to life. And,
absolutely.
and there is,
yeah.
kashrut has some practical aspects as well.
I'm sure, but I'm just talking about one of the major reasons behind it, right? And actually, I think that one of the reasons why people found so many practical reasons that one should keep kosher is so that it wouldn't have to be about staying away from other people, right?
No, I believe that, for instance, if you're living in a desert, and you don't have refrigeration, I think pork is not a good idea.
But
I just don't think it's a good idea.
But no kind of meat is a good idea, right? So that when there was meat, right, it was either eaten immediately or preserved with salt. And pork jerky is just as doable as beef jerky. So
True.
I think that so, and I'm not saying that there aren't really practical reasons, but I do think that many of the practical reasons we've come up with for keeping kosher have to do with not having to deal with the fact that there's this sort of inconvenient reason why we do it. And I'm someone who has, I have my way of keeping kosher. I don't mix the meat and the milk, and when I do eat meat, I only eat kosher meat, right? So it's like it is an important practice to me, but that is what I'm conscious, right, that I do not want it to be a practice that separates me from people who are not Jewish, and B, from people who are Jewish and don't keep kosher, right? So
you wouldn't want to reject an invitation for dinner,
exactly,
because they're not kosher,
right? Exactly. So it takes a little communication. It takes and it risks some sort of as all spiritual practices do, right? And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's worth thinking about. All right, so who would like to say one of the things that's currently part of their Shabbat practice? Go ahead, Maya.
Well, I've been making it a practice to always clean my house before sundown on Friday. I really love doing that.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm going to write that one down. I love that.
Oh, I thought that was really common, but anyway, that's mine.
Well, unfortunately, one of the things that has gone away during the pandemic is decluttering. I still clean my house, but I don't. I think decluttering would be a great thing.
That would be good. And then
it's something to aspire to.
Exactly. And what and Maya, are you ready to say what you'd like to do, or you want to wait?
Well, besides cleaning, I also like relay my table with a new cloth and placemats and and of course, like get the candles ready, stuff like that. I don't know yet what I'm gonna do more.
Okay. That's fine. There's no hurry. If you didn't think of another practice, part of the point of this, right, is to hear practices that other people do, to learn from one another. So go ahead, Heba, if you are willing.
Yeah, I'm willing. Years ago, I read a book by Rav Schechter Salom
Mhm.
who said, the name of the book was Jewish with Feeling. And it kind of inspired me to do kind of his thoughts on how to keep Shabbat, which is, I don't do anything that I don't enjoy.
Mm.
You know, if it's not enjoyable, then I try to avoid it. So keeping house is not enjoyable to me. However, cooking is, and I know I'm not supposed to on Shabbat, but I love cooking. I truly enjoy cooking.
Right.
And so, and I like to try different recipes, and I mean, even though I live by myself and I no longer cook for anybody, I don't care. I still try different recipes and
Wonderful.
do different, you know. Another thing that I do that I know is not appropriate or not kosher for Shabbat is I enjoy crafts.
Yes.
It's not my work. I don't make a living from embroidery or from quilting or from sewing or from any of that. I don't, you know, I don't make a living that way. So for me, that's not work.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think that what he was trying to emphasize is that if sewing was your work, then you should refrain from it.
Right.
But if it's not your work and you enjoy it,
Right.
so
Right. So right, and yeah, and just to be clear, right, the prohibition against work on Shabbat is not clear in
No.
the Torah, right? And so what the rabbis do is they develop all of these categories of work based on the creation of the Mishkan, right? The creation of the tabernacle in the desert. So one of the things, of course, that is involved in making that tabernacle is embroidery and sewing, right? So, you know, those things are dafka, you know, not supposed to be done in a traditional
right.
Shabbat framework, right? But a traditional Shabbat framework is not going to work for a lot of people, right? So, so if that is, you know, so behaviors and activities that are enjoyable, right, seem like they're appropriate for Shabbat.
And I use electricity.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and
I turn
again,
off the lights and I turn off the
With
lights.
Zoom, you have to.
you use Zoom. I mean, like, we're not,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's actually this is a really that is a really interesting topic, right? The use of technology on Shabbat,
Yeah.
right? Because there already was, I would say, a fairly large dividing line between liberal and Orthodox Jews regarding the use of technology, right?
Right.
But I think that it's grown, right, now that even traditional conservative synagogues like KI, right, now use Zoom on Shabbat, and that's it was really, I mean, when we had a couple of people in the worship and study minyan for many years who really struggled and couldn't make it to shul anymore. And when they were, and I really tried to figure out how to do live streaming of the services so that they could participate. I never did figure it out because we never had Zoom.
Right.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
that we've had it, I feel like we're not going to have the option, right, of putting the toothpaste back in the tube. I don't feel like I'm ever going to be in a position to tell someone that they need to come to shul or they can't participate in the service.
May I mention something else?
Go ahead, Ellen. And I think Helen wanted to say something. So Ellen and then Helen.
Thank you. I mentioned a person who's Jewish who lives in my building, and she's lovely, and she's very ill, and she's on oxygen. So she can't have anything with flame. Well, last year, the other person to whom I gave Horosis gave her a plastic menorah that's electric. This year, this woman who is so ill, she was watching for the death of her sister. And she was very concerned because she couldn't put up any kind of yahrzeit candle, and as her sister would have wanted. And so I looked in the internet, and there from, I've forgotten the word for the company, but it's the octopus company. They made electronic yahrzeit candles.
Right.
And I could find one and get it for about $3, which shocked me.
And Anne is showing one
she
off on the screen right now. So
Excuse me?
I just said that Anne is showing one off to everyone who has a screen. You and Fred can't see it, but everyone else can. So yeah. So thank you, Ellen. Go ahead, Helen.
Well, a couple comments. One is, I remember at Worship and Studies some years ago, there were a lot of people who did not want technology in during Shabbat. And I thought that was kind of mean because of the sick people and the people who wanted to be a part of it. But now, of course, as you said, with Zoom and everything that's happened, that contingent won't be able to do much about that. But in terms of my Shabbat, I guess what I miss most is going to worship and study on Shabbat when I would make it. And I keep trying to push myself to do it online, maybe, Zoom it, etc. I haven't. But one thing about Shabbat I remember is my mother, the candles and the things she always did around her eyes, that we never understood till I read more about it. And one of the things she said to me is, I hope you will keep Shabbat. And I don't always. When I do, I light the candles and say a few prayers or whatever. I feel better about it. So this is encouraging me to do it, I guess, is what I.
So candles, that's a great, and Maya mentioned the candles.
Yeah.
They can be candles with flames. They can be candles without flames.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Whatever's appropriate for your surroundings.
Right.
Your mother might not be happy with the electric candles, but look, not everyone.
Oh, she
was
very modern. I don't think but I mean, yes, I can still light candles and have bread and wine. Challah or whatever.
Right.
But I think even that and the thought of thinking about the day, the Saturday, as different.
Yeah.
Whatever you do then, and I used to, after services, some of us would go for coffee and talk about ideas and things. And that also made the Shabbat feel more special.
Yes.
For to be with people and
yes.
and share ideas. So anyway, thank you for reminding us.
So that's great. I love those answers. I actually will acknowledge that the thing that I first wrote down as current Shabbat practice is shul, right?
Yeah.
And Ellen was just reminding us, right? What I had taken for granted, right? For all the years that I was Jewish, I just took for granted that we would have a Torah service. It never occurred to me.
Right.
I would be like, "Oy, no one signed up for the laning today. I have to do the Torah. I have to read and this and that." And oh my gosh, we get to do a Torah service again. Like, it's this amazing, sort of realize it's this amazing privilege to be able to do it.
Yes.
And so, yeah, shul, and I loved what you said, Helen, about gathering for coffee, right? To have a group after shul, right? I mean, the traditional way that happens, right, is that someone hosts a Shabbat lunch, right?
Mm-hmm.
which is not really practical for worship and study, right? With people coming from all over the place and
Right.
and the busyness of our lives and the blah blah blah. But a coffee klatch after shul is
Yeah.
exactly the same thing, right? It's just that it's it was at Pete's rather than at someone's home. And so Shabbat is about people. I love that, right? Shabbat is about people and being in community. Yeah, that's wonderful. And lighting candles is a great practice to take on for Shabbat.
Well,
Go
it's
ahead,
a
Lori.
demarcation between between the beginning of Shabbat, just like, at the end of Shabbat
Right.
to do the,
Duh.
To
Yeah.
do Havdalah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And you know what?
That's-
I just if this were an in-person class, I would propose that we have that we do a Shabbat dinner somewhere. So maybe we can do that when life allows us.
and I'll cook.
Oh, wonderful.
I love to cook. And
That's great.
I
I'll
mean,
bake.
All right,
you
so
know.
Heather, we'll come over to your apartment. We'll all squeeze into your apartment.
no, we can do it downstairs in the community room. I
exactly,
can
right,
just bring it down. Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
And I can
Great.
cook for volume.
That's
You're dreaming. This is going to go on for
Sandy,
a
we're
long
dreaming this-
time, and nobody comes to or very few people come to Friday night services.
Oh, see this.
You know, so
Sandy
let's
is right. Sandy is right. Sandy
cut this nonsense.
is right. The people don't come to Friday night services, but there's a lot of Jews who don't, and it's not so much because they're
Oh,
here.
come on! If we get 6 people, if we sometimes
We're
get
lucky.
a minion, we're
Oh,
way
on
ahead.
Zoom it is very difficult. On Zoom it is
No,
difficult.
it's not difficult.
So go ahead, Lori.
Well, I was also going to say that candles have long been something very important, not in terms of halachic candle lighting time, because sometimes I would get home from work and finish my shopping and get the food in the oven like 9:30 at night in the winter. But
That's right.
those candles were going to be lit, and then I was going to stay awake until they burned down, and that was my demarcation. But I'm really very taken with what Eva said, and those sensibilities resonate with me. I don't do anything that I don't enjoy. I don't do my work. I love to cook. I love flowers. I will plant flowers, but I will not mow the lawn. I will cook.
Great.
You know that I'm a preserve maker.
Right.
Once I started selling my preserves, I stopped making them on Shabbat. And the big dichotomy is wanting to be at services and the absolute lack of joy in getting from Newton to Cambridge on a Shabbat morning and finding a place to park. But when I did do it, the coffee, the Pete's Minion after services was a very important part of Shabbat for us.
That's great.
Rabbi,
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
I'd like to echo Sandy's comment.
Yeah.
People that are looking for something meaningful to do ought to tune in for our Erev Shabbat services. There are people that want to say Kaddish,
Right.
and they don't have a minyan. We hardly ever have a minyan, and it's a mitzvah to make a minyan, so we need to have people come for whatever reason they come.
Right. And it is very, I mean, I will say, I do like the fact that it's a small group. I would like it to be
At least
10 at least, so that we can say Kaddish and so on and so forth. But I do like the fact that it's a small group, and that's one of the things that's most appealing about it, is that it's quite intimate. We had our Seder this year. I think most people who wanted a Seder and had Zoom, had they had a Zoom Seder, maybe with family or whatever. So we didn't have that many people at our Seder, and it was wonderful.
Yes.
Everyone was able to participate. Everyone was really sort of in the circle, so to speak. And And so, I also want to encourage people to come on the Friday evening. And it's also just, from a bar bat mitzvah perspective, right? It is a spiritual practice, right, of ushering in Shabbat, right, of welcoming in Shabbat with song, and since it's mostly singing, right, it's more accessible than say the Saturday morning service, where there's a lot of silent prayer, which can be challenging. All right, Lori, go ahead, Mime.
I'm thinking about what you all are saying about coming to services and just looking at your bulletin, and it looks like there's actually a live service tonight at the Skyline.
Yes.
There is. So I will go over to the sign-up sheet and see if there's a spot. But you could certainly, if you don't mind coming over and risking it, because it's very often people sign up, but for this reason or that reason they can't come. So you could certainly risk it and come over anyway.
And
where will it be?
Cafe is big enough that we can fit in.
Skyline Cafe is very big. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's at 100 Center Street, Ellen, and we can not yet invite visitors to programs in person, but we can certainly invite them on Zoom. So yeah, and we do at 5:30 people start getting together, and I start calling people who need to be called on the Zoom.
Yes.
And people can chat, and I sing a song or two, and then we do our service at 6. So.
Could I say something about commanding?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure, because I'm very ignorant, and I don't fish for anything when I say that. It's simply fact. But my feeling is about what are we commanded to do? And my understanding from what I've been learning is that God asked exactly one important command: to love him.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not the same as all the details.
Yes, there is that tradition.
And the Shabbat.
Yes, right. There is a tradition, right? And it's most pronounced in the form of Judaism that became Christianity, right? That religion is all about loving God, right? And it certainly is true in Judaism, right? Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, right? That you should love the Lord your God, right? The problem with that word love, right, is that it means a whole bunch of stuff in Hebrew that doesn't necessarily get captured by the English, right? So one of the aspects of love in Hebrew, right, is a kind of sort of a loyalty and whatever the noun form of obedience, right? Of God, right? So which implies, right, a series of behaviors, right? A series of do's and don'ts, right, that goes along with that love.
But the primary one seems to be to observe the Shabbat.
It's one of the most important commandments, is definitely. Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, Romney.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. We really enjoyed it.
So feel free to come back, and let's have a conversation soon about next steps.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. Good Shabbos. Happy Pesach.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right. So before we close and turn to Hebrew, if people want to do that, I wanted to know, did we miss anyone who would like to share what they do now who hasn't spoken? And Lori, you got to talk about what you like to do, but you haven't. Unless I missed it, I didn't get a sense of what you are thinking in terms of a practice you might adopt.
No, you didn't miss it. I think I have Friday night where I want it for now. I need to introduce a little bit more mindfulness to Saturday,
Mm-hmm.
to the not doing the work, but being a little bit more mindful about the things that I do.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say for now.
That is a huge practice.
It's much harder than I thought.
It's right. And actually, and I'll share with you, my desideratum, right? The thing that I had in mind that I would like to add, right? Which is something that I used to have much more than I do now, which is a digital detox, right? It used to be that Shabbos, especially Shabbos morning, was this wonderful break, right, from screens, because I would be in shul, right, and Hillel is a screen-free environment on Shabbat, right, and the worship and study room, Smith Hall, with very, very few exceptions, people understood that if we were to keep our various screens away, right, and people by and large knew not to call me in the morning on Shabbat. And that's all different now. I mean, it's impossible for me, right, to be, and that has now meant somehow, right, that Shabbat is one of the most tech intensive days of my week.
That's a pity.
Yeah.
That's a pity.
I think there's a way to do that. And I actually learned some of that from the late Hillary Putnam, who had, as a philosopher, a way around anything.
I'm sure.
Where I do try to keep technology to a minimum. But the year that Hillary was on sabbatical in Germany, writing to each other on Saturday afternoons was some of the best part of Shabbat, where his philosophy became that using email on Shabbat as opposed to the internet was like talking to people.
Yeah.
And he considered that a crucial part of Shabbat.
Right.
And I think I've sort of adopted some of that. That's when I'll reach out to people that I haven't heard from.
Right. And let me be clear, right, that the reason that your comment, Lori, prompted mine, right, is not because I want to get rid of technology on Shabbat, right? It's that I want to be mindful of my use of it, right? That one of the things that has made, one of the things that the pandemic has done, right, is it's made the technology unavoidable, right? And when something is unavoidable, right, it can be a little bit harder to be mindful of how you're using it, right?
I regret the fact that there's developed a dichotomy, a division that I hope heals once we're back partially live, a division in the worship and study minyan from the people who, on principle, refuse to do Zoom.
Right.
They may drive their cars, they may use their computers, but they'll be damned if they'll use Zoom Shabbat.
Right.
And
there are
funny.
people, and there are people
dividing us in half.
Right. And there are people at 100 Center Street and at CCB, right, who are not, strictly Shabbat observant, right? But their Shabbat observance does not include the use of Zoom. So, so I am, of course, as a rabbi and chaplain, I want people to have the Shabbat that they want to have, right? I don't want to impose my Shabbat on them. And at the same time, I'm aware that I have to serve, sort of the whole community. So it does raise a lot of interesting questions.
So I wonder whether when we're back live and you say that it's not going to be possible to, put the toothpaste back in the tube, hopefully the people who are anti-Zoom Shabbat will not feel that worship and study is not their minion anymore.
That has to be
that would be a terrible shame.
That would be a loss.
I miss these people a lot.
Right. What I think is the reality, right, is that some of them, I think by and large, if they want to have a Zoomless experience, they would have to go to the African Orthodox synagogue, because I think the vast majority of liberal synagogues.
Would they ever take a car to get to the synagogue?
Yes.
Oh yeah. But,
see, that's what I find really ridiculous. To be, because the Zoom is not an end in itself. It's simply a means to go to the synagogue. It's just bizarre.
But I want to
explain less energy out there to like
this, Ellen, that Worship and Study, when it was founded on the Harvard campus. Many of the people who were those that are still alive, and the original members, don't live in Cambridge anymore, but they still want this to be their community. So they're going to drive, and they're going to carry, and they're going to do all these other things.
I want to make it clear, right, that this is a great example, right, of what I was talking about at the very beginning of our conversation, right? This is about being mindfully in charge of your own spiritual experience.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So that people who there are going to be in that you can't expect people to behave in ways that we might feel are consistent, right? So there are people for whom driving to shul is the vehicle in which they get to shul.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
But for whom Zoom is such a distraction, right, that they can't do shul. And my attitude, right, is that we're humans, right? We can adapt to an awful lot of otherwise unattractive stuff, right? And so, like, I never thought, right, that I would be able to have the kind of experiences that we've had on Zoom. It never occurred to me. And someone in the congregation Ellen, you're a good example of it, right? Who experienced the full joy and sort of just almost ecstasy, right, of being able to take the Torah out.
Yes.
And that experience was no less intense for being online or being on the telephone. The person I was talking to. That
was clear.
Right, the person I was talking to said it felt like I was there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, for that person, Zoom has become transparent, right?
Yeah.
Is that to say that it won't be better for them when they're in person? Of course not. Of course it'll be better, right? But Zoom has reached a level of transparency that the car has. Driving a car to Shabbat is one of the worst things that I can do. I'm always stressed out when I get there. So whenever I can, I ride a bike to Shabbat.
Yeah, but then you can get killed.
You get killed in the car too.
The car also.
I just want to say what Shabbat has come to seem for me.
Great, thank you.
It's quiet. It's not people in a big sense, but I love coming on Friday and I love coming on Saturday, and I never did any time other than this, had that feeling. And it's an odd thing to say that when I leave, I don't want to go buy something. I don't really want to do anything in particular. I guess if someone were sick, I would go visit them, but that hasn't been needed. But what I have as a response to coming to the services is I leave calmed.
That's great.
Lovely. That's beautiful.
It's simply a truth. It's a wonderful feeling, and given my family and my background, I never expected this. And I'm just very grateful. I don't care what I would need to get to it.
Wonderful.
And then there's the mitzvah of the Shabbos nap.
Oh,
The what?
the
The
Shabbos,
mitzvah of the Shabbos nap.
That's
Oh,
a
of course.
that's very important.
That's included. Sometimes the quieting and the calming makes me want to go to sleep.
Right, exactly. And that's a big
And that's a
part.
mitzvah.
All right, so we will shift gears here. So anyone who has questions about the Hebrew, now is a good time to ask them.
I'll see you later, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Well, I won't see you, but
I was
I will be
drilled by-
there later.
I was drilled by Sherry. I can't do any more vowels or see any more dots in front of my eyes today.
That's
Sorry.
Rabbi
No,
Jim,
good, Lori. Talk to you soon.
Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos.
Rabbi Jim,
Yeah.
do you have a book now? Did you find a book?
No, I didn't. No, I don't have a book, so I won't be able to. I won't be able to answer specific questions about stuff in the book unless someone can share.
I have a question. On page 41, it says ma, what, and how. I didn't understand that.
All right. Mayim, can you have you gotten there?
Yeah, but I don't see what she's talking about.
I don't either, and
The
I'm
middle
there.
page on page 41, it says
Oh,
what,
ma,
how.
ma, right. The different forms of ma, what. It
What-
gives three
What-
forms, like,
Does it mean what, or does it mean how, or why is it printed 3 times?
well, it's like, how you doing, what's happening too, so,
Yeah, and probably there's different vowels under it, right? There's
right.
yeah. So right. So the ma can be ma, or sometimes I think it's meh. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which depends on what's following it, Ellen. So don't.
What does the third one mean? What does the third one mean?
That's ma with kamat.
Oh, okay. And that's going to be before a guttural, I think.
Oh, okay.
So the vowels are different?
It's the same word, just the vowel changes depending on what consonant is following.
Yeah,
So it could be
the
what
vowels
or
make it different.
how, depending on the vowels?
No, it's what or how, regardless of the vowels.
Oh,
And
What
the
or how,
vowel,
regardless-
what the vowel is determined by what consonant follows it. But I don't know.
Ah.
I don't know the rules off the top of my head. I don't know them by heart. So, but that is one of the complicated things about Hebrew, right? Is that vowel reduction? That's what it's called when the vowel, the sound of the vowel changes, depending on the makeup of the word, right? What happens in Hebrew is that the vowel symbol changes, right? Whereas in other languages, right, that happens in it happens in English too, right?
Sure.
Right, something is broad, right? But when we talk about how broad something is, we talk about its breadth, right? So it's the same word, right? But the vowel has changed, right? And English reflects that change in the way the word is spelled. In some cases, not in all cases, right? And in Hebrew, it's always reflected because the vowel system evolved after the consonantal system, right? So It works that way in English because there was no standard English spelling for, for.
How do you pronounce house?
That was my next question too. On page 43, there's the whole list, starting with Bayet, Bayit, and Bayot, and is the little yud pronounced in there? And then it
Yeah.
goes through all the forms of my house, your house, and all that.
Yeah,
How do you say house?
right. So you you say house bite,
Bite,
right?
bite. How do you get bite out of
Bayit,
bite?
right? Bayit. You would never. I'm over exaggerating it, right? When you say bite, but it's really bite. And so like you could say it's like bite with a little bite at the end.
Okay.
And so what they're doing there, right? Is they're in. This is another example of vowel reduction, right? Every time, right, that every suffix, the suffixes are the possessive pronouns.
Possessive
Right?
endings, they call them. Yeah.
Right. So in English, we say it's your house, right? In Hebrew, it's betcha, right? If
Beitcha. Okay.
betcha, if you're talking to a male,
Right.
and betach if you're talking to a female.
Oh,
Right.
this says Beitech.
Oh, betech, right? Yeah, betech. Sorry.
Oh, no, wait, that's your house. Okay. Beitach for her house. Okay.
Betach for her house. Yeah.
Beitach, right.
I mean, you don't necessarily need to emphasize the ha-ness of it, but it can.
Beka for her house?
Betach.
And for
And
his
they-
would be Bay,
Ka for your house?
And for his house, it's beto.
Beto.
As it is on page 43, Ellen.
What is your house feminine?
Say betech.
Hech.
Betech?
Heh, Beitech.
Betech. These are, and again, what I would say to you, right, is I mean, I'm not going to tell you not to do this, right? But you don't, in my opinion, you don't have to sweat these details.
Yeah.
Right? The idea is for you to be able to recognize them when they come along, and so that they don't freak you out.
How do you
Right?
say my house?
Beti.
So that little yud in there,
Yeah.
Comes
you
in-
don't really say it, or it's just a way to get in another vowel, like
Yeah.
bait, and the base form is bait.
Well, you pronounce so that the funny thing about Hebrew, right, is that before there were the squiggles that now represent the vowels, there were 3 letters that were vowels, and
Oh,
or maybe it was 2, I don't remember, but anyway, it was the vav, right, was, and then and the yud, right. So
Okay.
those 2 letters are sometimes vowels and sometimes consonants, right? Which is not so different than, what are the 5 vowels in English? A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes
why?
Y, right? So think of, the vowels in Hebrew, it's, sometimes the yud is a vowel, sometimes it's a consonant. So when you see a vowel under the yud, Mayim, it's pronounced as a consonant. When
Oh.
there, when
Yeah,
there
I
is
discovered that the vav can sometimes be a vowel as well.
oh, absolutely.
Right. It's
Right. So
O
like
or U.
in the case of his house, right, Beito, right, that's a vav that's a vowel, right?
Right.
But but every time you see it as a vocalized vav in front of a word, right? As the common and, right? There's many more ands in Hebrew than there are especially in biblical Hebrew, many more ands than there are in English. Every time you say va whatever, right? That's a vav as a consonant. But when you say it is an O, right, or as an O, it's a vowel. So, yeah, go ahead, Ellen. You're muted though. Ellen, you're muted.
My house is Beiti.
Beiti. Mm-hmm.
Your house masculine was Beita.
Beitcha.
Beika. Your
Beitcha.
house feminine is Beitek.
Yep.
His house is Beito.
Beito, right.
And her house is Beika.
Beita. Right, and what you'll notice, right, is, so that's a good example of a vowel reduction, right? So bait, right, bait, right, those two, it's not just vowel reduction, it's also consonantal reduction, right? That yud in bait stops behaving as a consonant and begins behaving as a vowel, right? So it becomes just, that IE sound gets reduced to A. So it's just bait, right? From bait to bait, right? And you'll see later on, right? Probably not yet, you probably haven't seen it yet, but we will eventually encounter, as we do many times in the prayer book, Beit Yisrael, right? The house of Israel is Beit Yisrael. And so you'll encounter those. So, get used to these types of changes, because and again, what I said before is true. The biggest thing is not to be freaked out by it, right? Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
So it keeps going in that vein after that whole page on house. And on 45, it's all the forms of father, which it says are unusual and irregular.
Yeah,
So,
father is it, and I also think that mother is.
Maybe I didn't get to mother yet. But anyway, your father, masculine and feminine, avicha, and then avich for feminine, masculine, avich. And it has that little yud in there, and that really doesn't do anything in there.
No, what happens, in terms of the pronunciation, not so much. But what the reason that it's irregular is that it looks, even though av is singular, it looks like the plural. So that the yud is usually a signal in masculine nouns is usually a signal for the plural. So it's like your father's, but it's singular.
Huh.
How do you say today in Hebrew?
Hayom.
Hayom.
Hayom. And there's a song, right, in the high holidays. Hayom, 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 hayom. Right.
How do you say kingdom?
Malchut.
Mahut?
Malchut. With a ch, malchut. Right, from the word melech, king.
And I have one more. How do you say kindness, mercy?
Chesed.
Chesed?
Chesed.
Chesed. But it's with a little bit of a ch.
Yeah, the chet, right, is supposed to be less hard than the ch. Right? So you say like chag sameach, right, rather than chag sameach. Right. I mean, functionally, you're talking, quickly. You're not necessarily going to make that much of a difference, the distinction. But and no one's going to be upset with you if you make a hard ch where there's supposed to be a softer ch. But
so kingdom is mahut.
Malchut. That's a kaf. So you should really emphasize the ness of it. The malchut.
It's interesting. I was sharing with Rachel yesterday in my tutorial that Puerto Rican Spanish has a ch as well. That's how we pronounce an R if it's at the beginning of a word.
Really interesting.
Yeah,
you don't trill the initial R, only the final R.
It's only an R on the beginning of a word.
Oh,
if it's inside the word, it's pronounced as an L.
Oh, okay.
You don't roll it because Puerto Rican Spanish is so fast that there's no time to roll your R.
Right. I remember that about Yeah, I may have mentioned this to you, Heather, that I had a girlfriend for many years who was a bilingual teacher, and her family was from Colombia, but she was teaching primarily Puerto Ricans, and she used to come home and just, she had such an attitude about Puerto Rican Spanish. It was so funny that, it's amazing how
Well, Colombian
people,
Spanish is quite lovely.
yes, well, and she was never tired of telling me. Go ahead, Maya.
So were you going into the difference in sound between kaf and chaf and then het?
Yeah, so a kaf with a dot in it, right, is a
Ka.
right,
And
like a K, right?
yeah, there's chaf.
Right, and then there's chaf, right, which is which as Cheve says is often can be sort of more a little bit harder on the ch, right?
Then
More like a Bach, right? And then that guttural sound is maybe a little bit less pronounced with the chet.
Okay.
Right? Closer to the H.
Is name Shemo?
His name, Shemo, is his name.
Shemo is his name?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So the kaf and chaf sofit are the strongest.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing, just 1 second, Ellen. One thing to always be aware of, right, is at the end that there are several words in the prayer book where the chaf sofit is actually a kaf sofit.
Oh.
So just to be ready for that. If you come to shul tomorrow, you'll see that at the end of Hallel, right, there are two examples of this at the very end of Hallel, where you don't aramim ka as opposed to the expected aramim cha. Why? I don't know, but you just have to be aware of it.
When you make a vowel using vav and you have a dot on the top, is that then called cholam?
Olam.
Cholam, okay.
Olam, yeah.
Not haolam?
No, different than olam.
Okay.
I was thinking it was cholam, but there's no ch sound, is there?
No ch. No, if you want a ch sound, you gotta you take a gimel and you put a chupchik next to it.
A what?
A chupchik. No, not a gimel, a zion.
I don't know that one.
A chupchik is like an apostrophe.
Oh, that's what those.
So gimel. If you want to make the sound that begins my name, you need to have a gimel and a chupchik. So you can make a j. That's how you make a j. And I think it's a zion and a chupchik to make a ch. Because it's like in Russian there's no H sound in Russian, so it's really a hassle to transliterate Hebrew into Russian because the H sound is all over the place in Hebrew. So just like there's no t sound in English, no letter, right, that represents it. So we always need to have a TS for that. But there is such a letter in Russian. So, alphabets obviously are imperfect instruments. Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
It's the plural of shemo, shemot.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. No, the plural of shame is shemot.
What
So
is
the plural of name in English is names. Name in Hebrew is shame, right? And the plural of that word is shemot. Shemo is a singular word, right? It's his name. And so it's better not to, you don't want to plural of Shemo would be Shemav,
Okay.
which
So
you don't need to know.
shame
Which you
means
don't need.
name
You don't
and
need to know.
Shemot is the plural.
What?
Shame means name and Shemot is the plural of shame.
Yeah,
And Shemo means his name.
his name.
Okay.
And there is a plural for his names, but I don't ever recall seeing it in.
Okay.
Although it would make sense, right? Because God has, endless numbers of names, so it actually would be not an unuseful word. But, all right. Any final questions before we close?
No.
Do you recommend we really work through all these exercises? Probably, I'm trying, but boy.
Well, what I would say is that just like mitzvahs, right? Exercises are there to the extent that they are useful and meaningful. If it's just busy work and is not helping you with your learning, then they are not useful to you. And I would not feel, any kind of a OCD need to fill out every single one. On the other hand, right, they give you a controlled way, right, of practicing without that sort of extra noise that you'll find if you're just trying to read the prayer book and you're getting derailed by all the words that don't make any sense to you. So some people learn better by that sort of isolating method, and other people learn better by just jumping into the prayer book and finding go and find every time you find the word Shemo, for instance. Like go to the Aleinu, and at the very end of the Aleinu, right, or the middle of the Aleinu, right, we have Kadosh Shemo, right, O Shemo Echad, right, and I have a colleague who calls those the three Shmos, right, because we constantly say Shemo, 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 Shemo Echad, right? And so now I've actually taken on Zoom now to only saying one Shmo. God is one. We shouldn't make three. Davka the Jew should not make three out of one. So I've been moving to one, but a lot of people are very used to saying three. But anyway, so going into the prayer book and looking for these words is great practice and might be better practice for you than the mindless
Exercise.
busy work of the exercises.
Yeah.
You should determine what works for you, because each person obviously has a very different experience of that. I found them to be very
I have a
useful,
question
but
about tonight's service.
yeah.
I have not attended your services on Friday night. I am curious. What time is it?
So 5:30 is a kumsitz, and we, people sit around and gab and wait for everyone to come on. And it's very sort of peaceful and slow, and there's not a lot going on, but people can talk, and I often play music if there's time, and then the service starts at 6.
At 6. Okay.
And about
But it's over before 8, correct?
Oh, we're done by 7.
By 7. Okay.
I need to leave, but thank you.
You're welcome, Helen. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a see you tonight, maybe.
Yes.
So
I have a
is
question.
everybody here like learning a different prayer or something for our Siyun B'nai Mitzvah?
That's actually, there were 2 topics that I wanted, and that was one of the things I was going to ask the Hebrew people who are learning Hebrew. That like, for instance, Mayim, I have it in my head. I don't know if you're actually planning to do this or not. I have it in my head that you're going to be doing the Ashrei.
Yes, I'm so glad you gave me that, and I'm
Right.
getting into it very deeply and really enjoying
It's
it.
an amazing psalm. So
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So I would love for people to take, one of the texts that's meaningful to them on the Saturday morning service.
Mhm.
I'm certainly not opposed to people learning something for Friday night, but I haven't really thought at this point yet about if there's going to be a Friday night component.
Oh, okay.
Through the weekend, it hasn't occurred to me until this very moment. So I would say let's focus on the Saturday morning. But anyone who feels comfortable, right, with that, I don't want people to feel uncomfortable or that they have to perform if they don't feel like they're going to be up for it. But I would really encourage people, because I think it's a great way to really, forcing yourself to say these things out loud, right, over and over and again, is just an amazing way of getting good at
Well, I'm in love with Ashrei. I'm discovering the poetry of it.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Just a gorgeous thing. Yeah.
So, Ellen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I asked you this question on Zoom and you said to ask it to you in person.
Okay.
Do you use the Hebrew pronoun in the sentence when there's no hey?
Yeah, I still don't understand that question, Ellen.
You don't have the book, right?
No, I don't have the book. Yeah.
I'll wait till next week.
Okay, sounds good.
You'll have the book next week?
I'm gonna really try to remember. I've got 2 copies of it, so I really should have one here in Brookline and one in Brighton.
All right, so I'll ask you the question next week about the pronoun in the hey.
Perfect.
Okay.
And Heva, so if you have an idea, I know you're doing something at Devar Torah, but if there's a text,
Well, we started working yesterday with Rachel with the Via Hafta.
Great. Oh, wonderful.
And
wonderful.
it's that's when I learned about all of these different vowels that turn into consonants.
Right.
So that's when I really learned about it.
Right. Yeah. So I think the Via Hafta might be something that everyone wants to do. So you should feel free to learn something else as well, if you'd like.
Oh, okay. Well, I haven't thought of something else. I was, just focusing on that right now. But I want to do it with the appropriate
right, with the trope.
Trope. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. Awesome.
Yeah, so.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbos. Hag Sameach.